The Wyoming Territory did not welcome strangers, and it certainly did not forgive mistakes. The land was a vast, open jaw of iron-hard earth and sagebrush, stretching out under a sky that looked like a sheet of bruised tin. It was late November in the year 1884, and the wind had teeth. It came screaming down from the jagged peaks of the Bighorn Mountains, cutting across the high plains with a sound like tearing canvas, stripping the warmth from anything living that dared to cross the open range. Hannah crouched in the back of the freight wagon, her fingers white where they gripped the leather handles of her carpet bag. She was 24 years old, but in the gray light of the afternoon, she felt ancient. The cold had seeped through her wool coat, through the layers of her petticoats, and settled deep in her bones. Every jolt of the wagon sent a fresh wave of nausea through her, but she did not complain. She had learned long ago that complaining only brought trouble. There were 2 other passengers huddled in the wagon bed with her, a pair of grim-faced prospectors who smelled of stale whiskey and unwashed wool. They ignored her, and she was grateful for it. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the worn toes of her boots, trying to make herself small. If she was small, perhaps the world would stop trying to crush her. Her hand tightened on the carpet bag. Inside, wrapped in an oilskin packet and sewn into the lining of her spare dress, were the papers. The deed to 160 acres of rocky ground and a signed affidavit from Dr. Ellison. They were the only shield she had left. She closed her eyes and saw the face of Silas McGraw, her late husband's older brother. She remembered the day of the funeral, the earth fresh and black against the snow, and the way Silas had looked at her across the open grave. His eyes had been dry and hard as agates. "You drove him to it," Silas had said, his voice low enough that the preacher could not hear. "You drove him to the bottle, and you drove him to his grave. Do not think you will keep a single acre of his land. Hannah, we will take it back. It belongs to blood." She had not poisoned her husband, nor had she driven him to drink. The drink had been in him long before she arrived, a dark inheritance that made him mean with his fists and careless with his life. He had died because he fell off his horse drunk in a creek bed and froze before morning. But the truth did not matter to the McGraws. They were a powerful family in the territory, and they had vowed to strip her of everything. The wagon lurched violently, throwing Hannah's shoulder against the rough wooden slats. She gasped, clutching the bag to her chest. "We are losing the light," the driver shouted from the bench, his voice thin against the wind. Hannah looked up. The horizon had vanished. The mountains were gone. In their place was a rolling wall of white, moving toward them with terrifying speed. It was not just snow, it was a blizzard, a whiteout that would erase the world in minutes. The wind rose to a shriek. The horses whinnied, a high, panicked sound that tore through the howling air. Snow began to drive sideways, stinging like birdshot. Within moments, Hannah could barely see the prospectors sitting 5 feet away. They were shouting something to the driver, but the words were snatched away by the gale. "Keep moving," one of the men yelled, grabbing the side of the wagon. "Do not stop!" The driver cracked his whip, panic making him reckless. They were crossing a section of broken country, full of ravines and dry creek beds hidden under drifts. The wagon slewed sideways, the wheels losing purchase on the frozen ground. "Hold on," the driver screamed. They hit the ice. It was a narrow cut in the land, a frozen creek bank disguised by a shelf of wind-packed snow. The lead horse stumbled, went down, and dragged the team with it. The wagon fish-tailed, the heavy rear wheels sliding out over the edge of the drop. For a second, the world seemed to hang suspended. Hannah felt the floor drop out from under her. She did not scream. She just held onto her bag. Then gravity took them. The wagon tipped and rolled. Wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. Hannah was thrown hard against the sideboards, her head cracking against wood. The world spun in a chaos of gray sky and white snow. She felt a crushing weight slam down onto her lower body, pinning her to the frozen earth. Then, silence. The wind still howled, but it was muffled now, distant. Hannah lay on her back, staring up at the underside of the wagon bed. She blinked, dazed. Snow was already drifting in through the cracks, dusting her eyelashes. She tried to move, and a white-hot, jagged bolt of pain shot up her right leg, tearing a gasp from her throat. She tried to sit up, but she could not. The heavy oak side of the wagon had come down across her legs, burying her waist-deep in the snow and debris. She was trapped. "Hello?" she whispered. There was no answer. She could hear the faint sounds of the horses thrashing in the snow, and then the sound of hooves fading away. The driver and the prospectors had been thrown clear, or perhaps they had run. In the confusion of the storm, they might not even know she was trapped. She was alone. The cold began to set in immediately. It was not the biting cold of the air, but the deep, numbing cold of the ground seeping into her blood. The pain in her leg throbbed, a steady, sickening rhythm, but beneath it, the numbness was spreading. Her toes were already gone. She laid her head back against the snow. It was strangely soft. So this is it, she thought. The panic she expected did not come. Instead, a heavy, gray resignation settled over her. She remembered the nights she had spent hiding in the barn while her husband tore through the house, breaking furniture and shouting her name. She remembered the taste of blood in her mouth when he had backhanded her for burning the biscuits. She remembered the look of pure hatred on his mother's face when Hannah had failed to produce a child after 3 years. If I die here, she thought, the McGraws cannot hurt me anymore. Silas cannot chase me. It is just sleep. It is just cold sleep. Her eyes drifted shut. The wind piled snow against her cheek. It felt like a blanket. The pain in her leg was fading now, replaced by a dull, heavy weight. She clutched the handle of the carpetbag one last time, her fingers stiffening into claws, and let her breath shallow out. Cole stood in the stirrups, squinting against the stinging ice. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, riding a roan gelding that was as tough and ill-tempered as the land itself. He wore a buffalo hide coat that had seen better years, a low-crowned hat pulled tight over his eyes, and a scarf wrapped around the lower half of his face. He was 5 miles from the ranch house, checking the north line fence. It was foolish to be out, and he knew it. The storm had come on faster than he expected, dropping from the peaks like a hawk stooping on a rabbit. He needed to find shelter, and he needed to find it now. He turned the roan's head toward the timberline, intending to make for the old line shack near the creek. The horse fought him, tossing its head, sensing the danger in the air. "Easy, you son of a devil," Cole muttered, his voice raspy from the cold. As he crested a low rise, he saw it, a dark blotch against the endless white. It looked like a broken rib cage sticking out of the snow. Cole pulled the horse up. He narrowed his eyes. It was a wagon, overturned and smashed half to kindling. One wheel spun slowly in the wind, a ghostly movement in the stillness. He spurred the horse forward, fighting the instinct to turn away. In weather like this, a man looked out for himself. But Cole had spent 10 years riding the trails from Texas to Montana, and there were rules you did not break. You did not leave a wreck unchecked. He reached the creek bed and dismounted. The snow was thigh-deep here. He slogged toward the wagon, the wind trying to knock him off his feet. "Hello, the camp," he shouted. The word snatched away instantly. He circled the wreck. The horses were gone, the traces cut. The driver had likely cut them loose to save himself. Cole spat into the snow. Cowardice was a common disease in the territories. He leaned down to check under the heavy wagon box, expecting to see nothing but scattered crates. Then he saw the hand. It was small, wearing a gray wool glove, sticking up from the drift as if reaching for the sky. It was motionless. Cole felt a jolt in his chest. He dropped to his knees, frantically digging with his gloved hands, throwing snow aside in great scoops. "Damn it," he hissed. "Do not be dead." He uncovered a shoulder, then a face, a woman. She was pale as milk, her lips blue, her eyes closed. Her hair had come loose from her bonnet and was frozen to her cheek. She looked like a statue carved from ice. He stripped his glove off and pressed his fingers to her neck. Her skin was freezing, but there, a flutter, faint, erratic, but there. "Wake up," Cole growled, tapping her cheek. Come on now." Her eyes fluttered open. They were gray, unfocused, glassy with hypothermia. She looked at him without seeing him. "My leg," she whispered. Her voice was a ghost of a sound. Cole looked down. The main side panel of the wagon, reinforced with iron strapping, lay across her lower thighs. It was heavy oak, buried under snow. She was pinned fast. He swore softly. He looked around. No leverage bar, no help, just him and the storm. He stood up and planted his feet in the shifting snow. He grabbed the edge of the wagon bed. He was a strong man, hardened by years of throwing calves and building fences, but this was dead weight. He took a breath, filling his lungs with freezing air. "I am going to lift it," he told her, though he wasn't sure she could hear. "When I lift it, you drag yourself out. You understand?" She stared at him blankly. "Move!" he shouted over the wind to break through her stupor. Cole bent his knees, braced his back, and heaved. A roar tore from his throat. The cords in his neck stood out like steel cables. His boots slipped in the snow, then caught. The wagon groaned, slowly, agonizingly. The heavy wood rose 6 inches, then 8. "Now!" Cole yelled, his face dark with blood, his teeth gritted. Something in Hannah's survival instinct sparked. She clawed at the snow, dragging her body backward. The pain in her leg was blinding as the blood rushed back in, but she scrabbled like a wounded animal until she was clear of the shadow of the wood. Cole let the wagon slam back down. The crash shook the ground. He collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, his chest heaving. He scrambled over to her. She was shivering now, violent, convulsive tremors that shook her whole body. She tried to curl into a ball. Cole unbuttoned his heavy buffalo coat. He pulled it off, the cold hitting him like a hammer through his flannel shirt, and wrapped the immense, heavy fur around her. He scooped her up, pulling her against his chest to share his heat. She looked up at him, her teeth chattering so hard she could not speak. She looked terrified, small, and broken. He pulled the collar of the coat up around her ears. He looked her dead in the eye, his face inches from hers. "I have got you safe now," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel under boots, but it was steady. He did not know if he could keep that promise. The storm was killing them both by the second, but he saw the way she grabbed the front of his shirt, her knuckles white, anchoring herself to him. "I have got you," he repeated. He stood up, lifting her with him. She was light, too light, bird-boned under the layers of wool. Her injured leg dangled uselessly. She cried out when he moved her, a sharp, keen sound that cut through him. He carried her to the roan horse. The animal rolled its eyes, dancing sideways, unhappy with the scent of blood and fear. "Stand," Cole commanded. The horse froze. Getting her into the saddle was a brutal affair. He had to lift her high, shoving her up while she gasped in pain, then swing up behind her. He settled her sideways across his lap, cradling her against his chest, wrapping the excess folds of the buffalo coat around both of them. She slumped against him, her head falling onto his shoulder. She felt like a block of ice. "Stay awake," he ordered her, turning the horse into the wind. "Talk to me. What is your name?" "Hannah," she mumbled into his neck. "Hannah? What?" "Just Hannah." He felt the tremors in her body begin to slow, which was a bad sign. She was fading again. He kicked the horse into a trot, heading for the timberline. The ride was a nightmare. The wind was a physical weight, pushing against them. The snow blinded him, sealing his eyelashes shut. The horse stumbled in drifts that came up to its chest, lunging and fighting for footing. Every slip sent a jolt of pain through the woman in his arms, but she had stopped making noise. Cole kept one hand on the reins and the other wrapped around her. His hand pressed flat against her back, trying to push warmth into her. He could smell her, beneath the scent of cold wool and impending death. There was a faint trace of lavender soap. It was a clean, civilized smell that had no business out here in this hell. He found himself talking to her, just to keep his own mind from freezing. "My name is Cole," he said into the wind. "I ride for the Double Star. We are 3 miles out, just 3 miles. You hold on." "Hannah," She drifted in and out. One moment she was back in the wagon, seeing the sky spin. The next, she was conscious of a wall of heat behind her, a solid chest that felt like stone. She could hear a heartbeat, slow and heavy, thumping against her ear. It was the only sound in the world that wasn't the wind. She felt his arm around her, holding her tighter than anyone had ever held her. It was not a possessive grip, like her husband's. It was an anchor. She buried her face in the rough wool of his shirt, breathing in the scent of him. Tobacco, horse sweat, wood smoke, and man, it smelled like safety. She felt her consciousness slipping, a black tide rising to take her. "Don't you quit on me!" His voice rumbled in his chest, vibrating against her cheek. "Do not you dare quit!" She fought the darkness because he told her to. The cabin appeared out of the white gloom like a miracle. It was a low-slung structure of rough-hewn logs, tucked into a grove of aspen trees at the base of a ridge. Snow was drifted halfway up the door. Cole halted the horse. He slid out of the saddle, his own legs numb and clumsy. He reached up and pulled Hannah down. She was dead weight now. He kicked the snow away from the door and shouldered it open. The air inside was stale and freezing, but it was still. He carried her to the single bunk built into the wall and laid her down. She did not move. Cole moved with frantic speed. He ignored his own shivering. He crossed to the cast-iron stove, fumbling with matches from a tin box. His fingers were stiff, useless things. He dropped the first match. He swore, struck a second, and held it to the kindling. The fire caught. Yellow light flared in the dim room. He turned back to Hannah. She lay huddled in his coat, her face waxy and pale. He needed to see the damage. He pulled the coat open. She was shaking again, which was good. Shaking meant life. "I need to look at that leg." "Hannah," he said. She stared at the ceiling, her breath hitching. He ran his hands over her heavy skirts, feeling for the break. When he touched her right shin, she screamed. It was a raw, jagged sound. "Broken," he muttered, "but the bone hasn't come through the skin. That is something." He moved down to her feet. The leather of her boots was frozen solid, caked with ice. "Your feet are frozen," he said, his voice grim. "I have to get these boots off." She tried to pull away, pushing weakly at his hands. "No," she gasped. "No, please, Hannah. If I do not get the blood back in them, you will lose the toes, maybe the foot." He did not wait for permission. He grasped the heel of her right boot. The leather was stiff as iron. He had to work it, twisting gently while she whimpered in pain. It finally slid off. He pulled off the left one. Then he reached for her stockings. They were wet, soaked through from the snow and frozen to her skin. Hannah froze. To be barefoot in front of a man, a stranger, was a shame so deep it burned through the cold. She tried to sit up, her face flushing a deep, mottled red. "Don't," she whispered. "Please, sir. It is not right." Cole paused. He looked at her. The firelight flickered across his face, highlighting the white scar that ran along his jawline. He saw the terror in her eyes, not of the cold, but of the impropriety, the vulnerability. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but his voice dropped. Softer than before. "There is no room for that here. Hannah, the storm does not care about what is proper. I am not going to let you lose your feet for the sake of modesty." He reached out and took her ankle. His hand was large, calloused, and rough, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He peeled the wet wool stocking down. Her foot was stark white, marble cold. Cole stripped the other stocking off. He did not look at her legs. He kept his eyes on her feet, treating them with the detached focus of a doctor or a horseman tending a wound. He grabbed a rough wool blanket from the end of the bunk and wrapped her feet in it. Then he sat on the edge of the bunk, pulled her wrapped feet into his lap, and began to rub them. He rubbed vigorously, trying to force circulation back into the extremities. Hannah gasped as the sensation began to return. It was not relief, it was agony. The pins and needles of thawing flesh felt like fire. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes. "It hurts," she sobbed. "I know," Cole said through gritted teeth. "I know it does." That means it is working. He kept rubbing. He could feel the smallness of her feet in his hands. The intimacy of it hit him suddenly. A physical blow. He was holding a woman's bare feet in his lap, in a cabin miles from nowhere, with a blizzard burying them alive. He could feel the curve of her instep, the fragile bones of her ankle. Heat rose in his neck, a mix of embarrassment and a sudden, sharp surge of desire that made him hate himself. She was hurt, she was half frozen, and she was a lady. He was a hired hand with blood on his conscience. He had no right to notice how soft her skin was. He clenched his jaw so hard it ached, forcing his mind to stay on the task. "Better?" he asked gruffly, not looking up. "Yes," she whispered. "The burning is less." He wrapped the blanket tighter around her feet and set them gently back on the bed. He stood up quickly, needing to put distance between them. The wind outside had changed pitch. It was no longer shrieking. It was a low, heavy roar that shook the logs of the cabin. The temperature in the room was dropping despite the fire. Cole walked to the single window. It was completely blocked by snow. "We are drifted in," he said, staring at the white blankness. Hannah pulled the buffalo coat tighter around her chin. She looked at the man standing by the stove. He was tall, dangerous looking, with a gun belt hanging off the back of the chair and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite. He was a stranger. She thought of the stories of what happened to women alone on the trail. She thought of her husband's fists. But then she remembered his hand on her ankle. It had been firm, but it had not been cruel. He had asked her name. He had carried her through hell and kept her warm. Cole turned to face her. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumping slightly. "We are stuck here. Hannah, could be 2 days, could be a week." He waited, as if expecting her to scream or cry. Hannah looked at him. The fear was there, coiling in her belly. But beneath it was something else, a strange, quiet instinct that she hadn't felt in years. "You came back for me," she said softly. Cole looked uncomfortable. He picked up a piece of firewood and tossed it into the stove. "I was checking the line." He said, "You dug me out." He shrugged, avoiding her eyes. "I would have done it for a calf." Hannah watched him. She doubted that. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." She said, "Just Cole." He corrected her. He pulled a bedroll from the corner and unrolled it on the floor, as close to the door as he could get, putting the maximum distance between himself and the bunk. "Try to sleep. Hannah, we have got a long winter ahead of us." Hannah lay back on the rough pillow. The pain in her leg was a dull throb now. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the world was ending in white and ice, but inside, the air was warm. She watched the shadow of the cowboy on the floorboards until her eyes grew heavy. For the first time in a long time, she closed her eyes without being afraid of what would happen when she opened them. "I have got you safe now." The words echoed in her mind as she drifted into the dark. She prayed it was true. The morning did not break so much as the darkness simply diluted into a heavy, suffocating gray. The silence was absolute, a thick wool blanket pressed against the ears, broken only by the occasional pop of a settling log in the cabin walls. Hannah woke slowly, surfacing from a dreamless, exhausted sleep. For a moment, she did not know where she was. The air smelled of wood smoke, old pine resin, and damp wool. She lay on a narrow bunk built into the wall, covered by a rough quilt that scratched against her chin. She tried to turn, and her body screamed. Her ribs ached with a deep, bruising throb, and her right leg, splinted and bound, felt heavy as a lead weight. The memory of the wagon overturning, the crushing snow, and the man with the scarred face rushed back to her. She pushed herself up on one elbow, her breath puffing white in the frigid air. The cabin was small, perhaps 12 feet by 10. The single window was a square of solid white. The snow must have drifted entirely over it during the night. The only light came from the cast-iron stove in the corner, where the embers still glowed a dull, angry red behind the grate. Movement caught her eye. Cole was awake. He had slept on the floor near the door, rolled in a canvas tarp and a threadbare blanket. He was sitting up now, pulling on his boots with a grimace. He wore his flannel undershirt, and the muscles of his back shifted under the fabric as he moved. He stood up, stamping his feet to wake the blood. He was a large man, taking up too much space in the tiny room. He moved to the stove, opened the iron door, and began to feed splits of wood into the fire. His movements were precise, economical. He did not waste motion. Hannah watched him. In the daylight, or what passed for it, he looked even harder than he had in the storm. He had a face that seemed eroded by wind and sun, all sharp angles and rough planes. A pale, jagged scar ran along his jawline on the left side, disappearing into the stubble of his beard. It looked like a knife cut that had gone deep. He sensed her eyes on him. He turned, the stove poker in his hand. "Morning," he said. His voice was gravelly with sleep. "Morning," Hannah whispered. Her throat was dry. "How is the leg? It hurts." "Good," Cole said, turning back to the fire. "Dead flesh does not hurt. Pain means the blood is moving." He picked up a tin coffee pot from the top of the stove and shook it. It rattled empty. He walked to the door and lifted the latch. He pushed. The door did not budge. He put his shoulder into it and shoved, the wood groaning, but it held fast. "Drifted over," he muttered. He grabbed a heavy iron pry bar from the corner and jammed it into the crack of the door frame. With a grunt of effort, he levered the door open a few inches. A cascade of snow tumbled in, white and powdery. He shoved harder, carving out enough space to squeeze through. He disappeared into the white tunnel, returning a moment later with a bucket full of clean snow. He set the bucket on the stove to melt. "We are buried," he said flatly, brushing snow from his shoulders. "The drift is near to the roof line on the leeward side. We are not going anywhere today." Hannah sank back onto the pillow. The reality of it settled on her chest, heavier than the quilt. She was trapped in a box of logs with a man she did not know, miles from civilization, while the people who hated her were likely already celebrating her death. She watched Cole as he moved about the cabin. He took a slab of salted pork from a hanging hook and sliced it into a skillet. The smell of frying fat filled the small space, making Hannah's stomach cramp with sudden hunger. He brought her a tin plate of pork and a biscuit that was hard as a rock but warm from the stove. "Eat," he commanded. Hannah sat up, wincing. She took the plate. "Thank you, Mr. Cole, just Cole," he said again. He sat on a crate near the stove, nursing a tin cup of coffee. They ate in silence, the only sound the wind beginning to pick up again outside, a low moan that vibrated through the floorboards. "I am Hannah," she said finally, wiping crumbs from her lip. "Hannah Kincaid." Cole nodded once, acknowledging the name. "I was headed to Bitter Creek," she continued, feeling the need to fill the silence. "To the land office. That is a long ride for a woman alone," Cole said. "I am a widow," Hannah said, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "My husband, Thomas, died 2 months ago. He left me a claim, 160 acres on the flats." Cole looked at her over the rim of his cup. His eyes were dark, the color of wet slate. "A widow," he repeated. "Yes, I am going to file the papers. To prove it is mine." She did not tell him about the McGraws. She did not tell him about the threats, or the way Thomas's brothers had stood on her porch and told her they would see her beg before they let her keep the land. That felt too dangerous to speak aloud, as if saying their names would summon them out of the storm. Cole set his cup down. "Good luck with that," he said. "Bitter Creek is a hard town. They do not take kindly to strangers claiming water rights." "I have nowhere else to go," Hannah said softly. Cole looked at her for a long moment, studying her face. She looked fragile, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair in a tangle, but there was a set to her chin that suggested she had been pushed around enough. He looked away. "I am just a hand," he said, answering the question she had not asked. "I ride for the Double Star mostly, checking fences, moving steers. You saved my life," Hannah said. "I was there," he said dismissively. He stood up and began to clear the plates. Hannah noticed that he kept his back to the wall as he moved, and his eyes flickered to his rifle leaning in the corner every time the wind gusted particularly hard. He moved like a man who expected the door to be kicked in. 3 days passed. The storm did not break. It settled onto the high plains like a brooding animal, holding the cabin in its teeth. The world outside ceased to exist. There was no sun, no horizon, only the relentless, shrieking wind and the white darkness. The cabin became their entire universe, a capsule of firelight and wood smoke suspended in a void. They fell into a rhythm born of necessity. Mornings began with the sound of coal breaking the ice on the water bucket. Then the fire, the coffee, the simple meal. Cole would spend hours checking the chinking between the logs, stuffing rags into cracks where the draft whistled through. He oiled his rifle, the smell of gun oil sharp and metallic, mixing with the scent of the stew simmering on the stove. Hannah lay on the bunk, healing. The swelling in her leg began to go down, changing from an angry purple to a sickly yellow-green. She felt useless, lying there while he worked. But every time she tried to stand, he would growl at her to sit down. The cabin was too small for modesty. They had to negotiate the awkward dance of privacy in a room 10 feet wide. On the second day, Cole offered her one of his spare shirts. Her own dress was torn and stiff with dried mud from the accident. "It is clean," he said, holding out a gray flannel shirt, "or as clean as it gets out here." "Thank you," Hannah said. He turned his back immediately, facing the door. He stood rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the rough grain of the wood. Hannah struggled out of her dress, her movements clumsy and painful. She shivered in the cold air, her skin goose-fleshed. She pulled the flannel shirt on. It was massive on her, the cuffs hanging past her fingertips, the hem reaching her knees. It smelled of him, tobacco and sage. "I am decent," she said. Cole turned around. His eyes swept over her quickly, then darted away. He looked at the stove, at the floor, anywhere but at her and his shirt. The intimacy of it was suffocating. She watched him when he thought she was sleeping. She watched the way his forearms corded with muscle when he chopped kindling on the hearth. She saw the scars on his knuckles. She saw the way his shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat. When the fire grew too hot, she tried not to look. She was a respectable woman, a widow in mourning. But the cabin stripped away the pretenses of civilization. There was only the heat, the smell of bodies, and the awareness of another living soul in the small space. The awkwardness hung in the air like smoke. They spoke little, and when they did, it was practical. "Need more wood. Leg hurting? Stew is ready." But beneath the silence, a current was running. Hannah found herself waiting for him to look at her. And when he did, she felt a flush that had nothing to do with the fever. On the 4th night, the wind died. The silence that followed was terrifying. Then, the cold came. It dropped from the sky like a hammer. The temperature plummeted. The frost patterns on the inside of the door grew thick and furry. The water in the bucket froze solid within an hour of supper. Cole fed the stove until the iron sides glowed cherry red, but it was not enough. The heat was sucked away the moment it left the firebox. The cold seeped through the logs, through the floorboards, biting at their skin. Hannah lay under the quilt in the buffalo coat, shivering. Her teeth chattered, a rapid, clicking sound she could not control. The pain in her leg flared up, a deep, bone-grinding ache intensified by the chill. Cole sat by the stove, wrapped in his blanket, watching her. He could hear the rattle of her breath. He knew the signs. If she got too cold, her body would give up. She was already weakened by shock and injury. He stood up. He looked at the bunk, then at his bedroll on the floor where drafts of sub-zero air were curling like snakes. "Hannah," he said. She looked out from the pile of furs, her eyes wide and dark. "The floor is too cold," he said, "and that fire is not going to hold against this drop." He took a breath, his jaw tightening. "We need to share the bunk." Hannah went rigid. The shivering stopped for a second, replaced by a cold spike of terror. She remembered Thomas. She remembered the smell of whiskey on his breath, the heavy weight of him pinning her down, the way he would not listen when she said no. She remembered the bruises on her arms and the shame that burned hotter than any fever. "No," she whispered. Cole saw the look in her eyes. It was not just modesty. It was fear. Pure, animal panic. He felt a surge of anger. Not at her, but at whoever had put that look there. He held up his hands, palms out, for warmth. "Hannah, that is all. You will freeze to death alone tonight, and I might too." He moved slowly toward the bunk. She shrank back against the wall, pulling the quilt up to her chin. "I promise you," Cole said, his voice low and steady. "I will stay on my side." He reached for the spare blankets from his bedroll. He rolled one of them into a long, thick cylinder. He placed it down the center of the narrow bunk, creating a physical barrier between the wall side and the edge. He looked at her. "Here's the deal," he said. "I will lie on the edge. You lie by the wall. This blanket stays between us. I will keep my hands to myself. If I move 1 inch across this line, or if you feel unsafe for 1 second, you push me off." He met her gaze. "You push me right onto the floor. Hannah, I will not fight you." Hannah looked at the barrier. Then she looked at his face. He looked tired and grim, but his eyes were clear. There was no lust in them, only a brutal practicality and a strange, quiet respect. She realized, with a sudden jolt of clarity, that this man would let himself freeze before he forced her. She exhaled, her breath shaking. "All right," she whispered. Cole nodded. He blew out the lantern, plunging the cabin into darkness, lit only by the red glow of the stove vents. He sat on the edge of the bunk and pulled his boots off. He lay down on the very edge of the mattress, his back to her, his body stiff as a board. He pulled the buffalo coat and the quilt over both of them. They lay in the dark. Hannah was pressed against the rough logs of the wall. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a solid wall of warmth on the other side of the rolled blanket. The silence stretched. The wind began to moan again, a low, mournful sound. "Cole?" she whispered. "Yeah, thank you. Go to sleep. Hannah." But she could not sleep. The proximity was overwhelming. She could hear his breathing. She could smell the soap he had used to wash his face. "Why are you out here alone?" she asked. Her voice was small in the dark. Cole was silent for a long time. She thought he might not answer. "I am not good company," he said finally. "You are saving my life. That counts as good company." He shifted slightly, the straw ticking of the mattress rustling. "I did things," he said, "back in the 70s, down in Lincoln County." Hannah waited. "I rode for a man who wanted land that wasn't his," Cole said. "It was a range war, rich men drawing lines on maps, and poor men dying to keep them there. I was a hired gun. Hannah, I wasn't just checking fences." He paused. "I killed men. Some of them needed killing. Some of them just got in the way." Hannah lay still. She should have been afraid. He was confessing to being a killer, but the way he said it, voice hollow, laced with a bitter self-loathing, made her heart ache. "I see the faces," Cole whispered. "At night. That is why I stay out at the line camps. Decent folks do not need me around their dinner tables. I do not deserve a home." Hannah turned her head on the pillow, looking at the dark shape of his back. "My husband," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "He didn't kill anyone with a gun, but he killed me, little by little." She took a breath. "He drank, and when he drank, he got mean. He would hit me for looking at him wrong, for burning the bread, for nothing at all." She felt Cole's body go rigid. His breathing stopped for a second. "The night he died," she continued, "he locked me out of the house in a sleet storm because I wouldn't give him the egg money to buy whiskey. He rode off to town and never came back. His family, they said I drove him to it. They looked at my bruises and said I was a clumsy, ungrateful wife." She let the words hang in the cold air. It was the first time she had told anyone the truth. Cole's hand, resting on his own chest, clenched into a fist. His nails dug into his palm until the skin broke. The rage that flooded him was hot and white. He wanted to find this Thomas, dig him up, and kill him again. "He is dead," Cole said, his voice a low growl. "And you are alive. That is the only justice you are going to get, but it is enough." He did not turn around. He did not try to comfort her with empty platitudes. He just lay there, a warm, solid presence in the dark, vibrating with a silent fury on her behalf. Hannah closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she did not feel alone with her shame. She felt protected, not just physically, but fully. "Good night, Cole," she whispered. "Good night, Hannah." The cold snap broke 2 days later, but the snow kept falling. The tension in the cabin shifted. It was no longer just the awkwardness of strangers. It was the charged, magnetic pull of two people who had shared their darkest secrets in the dark. They moved around each other carefully, like magnets with the same polarity, pushing and pulling. One evening, Hannah was drying a tin cup with a rag. She turned to hand it to Cole, who was reaching for the coffee pot. Their fingers brushed. It was a light contact, skin against skin, but it felt like a spark from the stove. Hannah gasped softly and pulled her hand back as if burned. The cup clattered to the floor. They both froze. Cole looked at her. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated. For a second, the mask slipped. The longing on his face was raw and terrifying. He looked at her mouth, then at her eyes. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to lean forward. She wanted to bridge the foot of space between them and press her face against his chest. She wanted to feel that heat again, not for survival, but for herself. But the memory of Thomas rose up, the grab, the pinch, the pain. She flinched. She took a step back, her back hitting the logs. "I am sorry," she stammered. I dropped it." Cole blinked. The mask slammed back down. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It is fine," he said roughly. He bent down and picked up the cup. He walked to the door and stood there, staring at the wood, his knuckles white where he gripped the cup. Hannah stood by the stove, trembling. She hated her fear, but she did not know how to separate the want from the danger. That night, the wolves came. It started with a howl, close and lonely, cutting through the wind, then another, then the sound of scratching. Cole was awake instantly. He rolled off his bedroll and grabbed the Winchester rifle from the corner. "Stay down," he hissed. Hannah sat up in the bunk, clutching the quilt. "What is it? Timber wolves?" Cole said. "They smell the cooking grease, or maybe they just smell us." The scratching came from the door, heavy bodies thudding against the wood, sniffing at the crack beneath the door. Cole moved to the small loophole cut into the logs near the door, a relic from when this cabin had been built as a defense against raiding parties. He pulled the wooden plug out. "I cannot see," he muttered. "It is pitch black." "Hannah, I need the light." Hannah swallowed her terror. She threw off the quilt and grabbed the kerosene lantern. She turned the wick up. "Come here," Cole ordered. "Hold it high, next to my head. Do not shake." Hannah limped across the floor on her splinted leg. She stood beside him. She could smell the wolves now, a musky, wild scent coming through the chinking. A low growl vibrated through the door, inches from them. "Hold it steady," Cole said. He levered around into the chamber. He peered through the hole. The light from the lantern cast a beam into the snow. Eyes reflected back, yellow, intelligent, hungry. There were 3 of them, big gray shapes milling in the drift. One was digging at the threshold. Cole took a breath. He lined up the sights. The rifle roared in the small room. The sound was deafening. Hannah flinched, but she did not drop the lantern. Outside, a yelp cut the air. The other shapes scattered into the dark. "Got one," Cole said grimly. He worked the lever, ejecting the spent shell. It chimed against the floorboards. He waited, watching the dark. "They are running," he said. "They won't come back tonight." He plugged the hole and turned to her. "You did good," he said. Hannah stared at him. Her ears were ringing. The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. The danger, the noise, the violence. It was too much. She set the lantern on the table. Her hands started to shake. Then her knees gave way. She sank to the floor, burying her face in her hands, and began to sob. It was a jagged, ugly crying, pouring out all the fear of the last week, the pain of her leg, the terror of the wolves, the grief for her lost life. Cole set the rifle down. He looked at her, helpless. He was a man who knew how to shoot wolves and fix wagons. He did not know what to do with a weeping woman. He knelt beside her. He wanted to pull her into his arms. He wanted to stroke her hair and tell her it was all right. But he remembered her flinch earlier. He remembered her story about the husband who grabbed her. He kept his hands to himself. He sat there, a foot away, letting her cry. When the sobs began to subside into hiccups, he reached out slowly. He took her hand, just her hand, where it lay on her knee. He squeezed her fingers. Tight. "I am here, Hannah," he said softly. "I am not going anywhere." Hannah looked up. Her face was blotchy and wet. She looked at his hand holding hers, large, scarred, capable of violence, but holding her with an exquisite gentleness. She turned her hand over and gripped his fingers back. She held on as if he were a cliff edge. "Thank you," she whispered. Cole looked at her. His eyes shone in the lantern light. He leaned in slightly, drawn by a gravity he couldn't fight. He looked at her tear-stained face and thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He wanted to kiss her. The urge was a physical ache in his chest. But he didn't. He squeezed her hand one last time, then released it. "Let's get you back to the bunk," he said hoarsely. The next morning, the sun came out. It was blinding. The sky was a hard, polished blue. The snow glittered like crushed diamonds, stretching to the horizon in every direction. Cole went out early. He shoveled the door clear. He checked the horses in the lean-to shed behind the cabin. They were hungry and gaunt, but alive. He came back inside, stamping snow from his boots. "The crust is hard," he said. "The wind packed it down." He looked at Hannah. She was sitting on the bunk, braiding her hair. "We can travel," he said. Hannah's hands stilled. "Oh," she said, "I can rig a sled from the wagon boards." Cole said, "The horses can pull it. It will be slow, but we can make Bitter Creek in 2 days if we push." 2 days? Hannah looked around the cabin. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of smoke. It was a hovel, but it was safe. She looked at Cole. If they went to Bitter Creek, he would leave her. He would go back to his ranch, to his fences. She would go to a boarding house and fight the McGraws alone. She felt a sharp, stinging sense of loss. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to go back to the world of staring eyes and cruel whispers. She wanted to stay here, in the snow, with a man who slept on the floor to keep her safe. "We should go," she said, her voice sounding hollow, "before the weather turns again." "Right," Cole said. He didn't look at her. He started packing his saddlebags. He moved sharply, angrily. He shoved his tin cup into the bag. He felt it too, the reluctance. He knew that the moment they rode into town, he would just be a hired hand again, and she would be a lady. The bubble would pop. "I will start on the sled," he said abruptly, and walked out into the snow. Hannah watched him go. She touched the spot on her hand where he had held it the night before. She realized then that the storm had been the easy part. The hardest part was going to be saying goodbye. The sun was a liar. It hung in the sky like a polished brass coin, bright enough to make a man squint until his eyes watered. But it gave no heat. The storm had broken in the night, shattering the gray ceiling of clouds to reveal a vaulted expanse of hard, brittle blue. The high plain stretched out under this cold light, a blinding tapestry of white drifts and wind-scoured ridges that glittered with the deceptive beauty of crushed glass. Cole stepped out of the cabin and tested the crust of the snow with his boot. It held. The wind had hammered the drifts into solid waves, frozen hard enough to bear weight if a man was careful. He exhaled, his breath pluming in a thick white cloud that froze instantly in his beard. "It is time," he said to the empty air. He went to work on the remains of the wagon he had dragged near the cabin days ago. The wood was splintered, but the long oak sideboards were intact. He used his hatchet to true the edges, his movements methodical. He was not a carpenter, but on the range. A man learned to make do with what he had or he died. He lashed the boards together with lengths of rope cut from the wagon's rigging, fashioning a crude, flat-bottomed sled. It was ugly, but it would slide. Inside the cabin, Hannah watched him through the open door. She had bound her leg tightly with fresh strips of cloth, wincing as she pulled the knot. She felt a heavy, sinking stone in her gut. This cabin, with its smoky air and drafty logs, had become a sanctuary. Out there, under that vast, uncaring sky, she was just a cripple and a target. When Cole came inside to collect the bedrolls, she tried to stand, leaning heavily on the table. "I can ride," she said. "If you help me up, I can ride behind you." Cole stopped, the saddlebags over his shoulder. He looked at her leg, then at her face. "You cannot," he said flatly. "That break is knitting. One slip on the ice, one spook from the horse, and you will shatter it again. I am not hauling a cripple to Bitter Creek. Hannah, I am hauling a woman who is going to walk again." He saw the flush of shame rise in her cheeks. "I am a burden," she said, her voice tight. "I am slowing you down. If you rode alone, you could be there by sundown." Cole dropped the bags. He crossed the room in 2 strides and stood in front of her. He did not touch her, but his presence was a physical weight. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and rough. "I have ridden alone for 10 years. It is faster, sure, but it is quiet. I am tired of the quiet. You are getting on that sled, and you are not going to apologize for it. Do you understand?" Hannah looked up at him. She saw the stubborn set of his jaw, the scar white against his wind-burned skin. She nodded, unable to speak. Cole wrapped her in the buffalo coat and carried her out to the sled. He settled her on a bed of pine boughs and blankets, tucking the furs around her until only her face was visible. He hitched the roan horse to the front, the leather traces creaking in the cold air. He mounted up, looking back once. "Hang on," he said. They moved out into the white emptiness. The sound of the runners on the hard snow was a high, singing hiss. The horses' hooves crunched rhythmically, a steady beat that marked the seconds of their survival. The journey was a study in desolation. The Wyoming Territory was a graveyard of ambition, a place where the earth tried to shake off anything that clung to it. They passed a grove of cottonwoods that had been snapped in half by the blizzard, their trunks exposing raw, yellow wood. They saw the carcass of an antelope, half buried, already picked clean by the wolves. Hannah lay in the sled, watching the sky. The rocking motion was hypnotic. She felt small, a speck of dust on a white table. Cole was a dark silhouette against the blue, his back straight, his head turning constantly, scanning the horizon. He was the only vertical thing in a horizontal world. The cold was a physical assault. It found the gaps in the furs, stinging her cheeks, numbing her nose, but beneath the buffalo coat, she was warm enough. She caught the scent of coal on the collar, tobacco and horse, and that indefinable smell of man. It made her feel safe, and that safety terrified her more than the cold. They stopped at midday to rest the horse. Cole built a small fire from sagebrush and driftwood, the flames almost invisible in the bright sunlight. They ate dried beef and drank coffee that was boiling hot, but turned tepid before they could finish the cup. "We are making good time," Cole said, looking at the sun. "We will camp at the Forks tonight, Bitter Creek by noon tomorrow." Hannah nodded, staring into the fire. Tomorrow. Tomorrow the world would come rushing back in. They pressed on. The sun began to dip, painting the snow in shades of violet and bruised purple. The temperature dropped sharply. They camped in a shallow draw, out of the wind. Cole unhitched the horse and picketed it on a patch of wind-blown grass. He built the fire high, using wood he had scavenged along the creek bed. They sat close to the fire, huddled on their bedrolls. The darkness was absolute, a heavy velvet curtain pinned with a million stars. The Milky Way was a slashed scar of light across the zenith. "It is beautiful," Hannah whispered, almost against her will. "It is." Cole agreed. He was sitting close to her, their shoulders almost touching. He was whittling a stick, the knife moving with steady, mesmerizing precision, beautiful and indifferent. It does not care if we live or die. Hannah pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. The McGraws care, she said softly. Cole stopped whittling. He did not look at her. He waited. They do not just want the land. Cole, she said, the words spilling out now that the darkness hid her face. They want to destroy me. Thomas, my husband, he had a sickness in him. The whiskey made it worse, but it was there before. He was reckless. She took a breath, the cold air hurting her lungs. When he died, his brother Silas came to the house. He tore through the cupboards. He found a bottle of liniment I used for the horses. It had arsenic in it. He held it up and told the sheriff I had been slowly poisoning Thomas for a year. Cole turned his head slowly. You never told me that. I was afraid. She said, it is a lie. Thomas died of pneumonia and drink. But Silas, he stood there in my kitchen, in the house I cleaned and kept, and he said, we will take back what belongs to us, and we will see you hang for a black widow. She reached into her carpet bag, her hand trembling, and pulled out the oilskin packet. I have the deed, she said, and I have a statement from Dr. Ellison. He treated Thomas, he knows the truth. But Dr. Ellison left town a week after the funeral. He was afraid of them too. Cole took the packet. He held it in his hand. Feeling the weight of the paper, it was just paper. In the West, paper burned easily, and Cole handed it back. Keep that hidden, he said. He threw the stick into the fire. Sparks swirled up into the black sky. You think the law will protect you? He asked, his voice cynical. It has to, Hannah said. It is the law. Law in a town like Bitter Creek is whatever the man with the most money says it is. Cole said, the McGraws have cattle, and they have gold. That buys a lot of justice. He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the flames. I will go to the office with you, he said. I will stand there while you file it. But Hannah, once that paper is filed, the target on your back gets bigger. I do not have a choice, she said, her voice rising with a sudden, desperate strength. I will not run. I ran from my father's house to get away from his belt. I ran from Thomas to the barn to get away from his fists. I am done running. That land is mine. I earned it with every bruise. Cole looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the steel backbone beneath the fear. He felt a surge of admiration so strong it almost knocked the wind out of him. Then I guess we make a stand, he said. The next morning, the solitude was broken. They were following the trail along the frozen creek when they saw a string of wagons coming toward them. It was a freight train. 4 heavy wagons pulled by teams of oxen, heading for the mining camps to the north. Cole pulled the sled to the side of the trail to let them pass. He rested his hand on the butt of his Winchester, a reflex born of habit. The freighters were rough men, bearded and wrapped in ragged furs. They slowed as they passed, eyeing the strange setup, the cowboy on the roan, the woman bundled in the sled, the driver of the second wagon, a man with a face like a hatchet. Pulled his team up. He looked down at Hannah. His gaze was slow and wet, crawling over her like an insect. He looked at Cole, then back at Hannah, seeing the lack of a wedding ring on her gloved hand, seeing the way they traveled alone. Well now, the man drawled, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the white snow. Looks like you found yourself a stray cowboy. Or is she payment for the ride? Hannah flinched as if he had struck her. The blood drained from her face. She felt the old, familiar brand of shame burning on her forehead. Loose woman, trash, property. The words she had heard her in-laws whisper in church. Cole did not move. His horse stood statue still, but the air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. Keep moving, Cole said. His voice was not loud, but it carried like a whip crack. The freighter laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. Just asking a civil question. No need to be hoarding the goods. She looks like she's been ridden hard enough already. The silence that followed was terrifying. Cole's hand blurred. In a split second, the Winchester was out of the scabbard and leveled at the freighter's chest. The hammer clicked back with a sound that echoed in the canyon. Another word, Cole said, his voice terrifyingly calm. and I will leave you here for the crows." The freighter's eyes went wide. He saw the look in Cole's eyes, the flat, dead look of a man who had killed before and would do it again without blinking. The man swallowed. He kicked his brake release. "Just joking. Friend," he muttered. "No offense meant." He cracked his whip, and the oxen lurched forward. The wagons rumbled past, the other drivers staring straight ahead, unwilling to meet Cole's gaze. Cole sat there until the last wagon disappeared around the bend. He did not holster the rifle. Hannah was shaking. She felt dirty. The man's eyes had stripped her, and his words had confirmed her deepest fear, that to the world, she was ruined. Cole finally turned his horse. He looked down at her. His jaw was clenched so tight a muscle jumped in his cheek. "Hannah," he started. "Don't," she whispered, pulling the coat over her face. "Just ride, please." They camped early that night, just 10 miles out of Bitter Creek. The mood had shifted. The easy intimacy of the previous night was gone, replaced by a jagged tension. The cold was vicious. A bitter wind sweeping down from the north. There was no question of sleeping apart. Survival demanded they share the heat. They lay under the blankets near the fire. This time, there was no rolled blanket between them. Cole lay on his back, his arm rigid by his side. Hannah lay with her head on his shoulder, her body pressed against his side. She could feel the steady thump of his heart. It was a slow, powerful rhythm. She felt the heat of him seeping into her frozen limbs. She shifted, turning her face toward his neck. She breathed in his scent. It was the only clean thing in a world that felt increasingly dirty. Cole turned his head. Their faces were inches apart in the dark. He looked at her lips. They were chapped from the wind, but full. He remembered the freighter's words, and a protective rage boiled in his gut. He wanted to erase that man's voice from her memory. He wanted to show her that a man's touch didn't have to take. It could give. Hannah looked at his eyes. She saw the want there, and God help her, she felt it too, a deep, aching pull in her belly. She wanted to be held. She wanted to be loved. She wanted to forget. She moved her head slightly. Her breath hitched. Cole leaned in. His movement was slow, a question. His lips brushed hers. It was a feather-light touch, tentative, reverent. And then the memory slammed into her. It wasn't Cole. It was Thomas, grabbing her hair, his whiskey breath hot on her face, his weight crushing her into the mattress. "You are mine, Hannah. You do what I say." Hannah gasped. Her body betrayed her. She flinched violently, her hands coming up to push him away, her whole frame going rigid with terror. Cole pulled back as if he had been scalded. He rolled away, sitting up, his back to her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice ragged. Hannah lay there, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The moment was shattered. The shame washed over her again. Shame that she was broken. Shame that she couldn't be normal. Shame that she had hurt the only man who had ever been kind to her. I can't," she whispered. "I am sorry. Cole, it is not you. I can't." Cole put his head in his hands. He hated himself. He had pushed too far. He was an animal, just like that freighter had said. "It is all right," he said, though his voice sounded dead. "Go to sleep. Hannah, I will keep the fire." He stood up and walked into the dark, away from the warmth, away from her. The next day, they rode in silence. The distance between them was measured in feet, but it felt like miles. Hannah lay in the sled, watching Cole's stiff back. She wanted to call out to him, to explain, but the words stuck in her throat. Cole kept his eyes on the horizon. He told himself it was better this way. She was a respectable widow with land to claim. He was a drift rider with a gunfighter's past. If he touched her, he would ruin her. The freighter was right about one thing. People talked. If he wanted to protect her, he had to be a wall, not a lover. Bitter Creek appeared around noon. It was not a welcoming sight. It was a scar of mud and gray wood on the face of the prairie. A single muddy street ran between 2 rows of false-fronted buildings. A church steeple rose like a reprimand against the sky. As they rode in, The town seemed to hold its breath. A few people were walking on the boardwalks, women in bonnets, men in canvas coats. They stopped. They turned. They stared. Hannah pulled the buffalo coat tight. She felt the weight of their eyes. She saw a woman whisper behind her hand to her neighbor. She saw a man spit into the mud and shake his head. They saw a woman lying in a makeshift sled, pulled by a rough-looking cowboy. They saw the lack of a wedding ring. They saw the scandal. Cole rode with his head high, daring anyone to speak. He pulled the horse up in front of a 2-story building with a sign that read, Mrs. Lang's Boarding House, clean sheets, hot meals. He dismounted and walked back to the sled. "We are here," he said. He lifted her out. For a moment, she was in his arms again, and the memory of the night before hung heavy between them. He set her down gently on the boardwalk, supporting her until she got her crutch, a length of ash wood he had carved for her, under her arm. Mrs. Lang came out onto the porch. She was a formidable woman with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at Hannah's splinted leg, her ragged clothes, and then at Cole's gun belt. "I have money," Hannah said quickly, fumbling for her purse. "Mrs." Lang looked her up and down. "I'm sure you do, Mrs." Lang said dryly. "She is Mrs. Kincaid," Cole said, his voice hard. "She is a widow. She was trapped in the blizzard. She needs a room, a bath, and no questions. Mrs." Lang looked at Cole. She saw something in his face, perhaps the exhaustion, perhaps the fierce protectiveness that softened her mouth. "Room 4 is open," she said. $2 a week. Meals are extra. Thank you." Hannah breathed. Cole turned to Hannah. "I will take the horse to the livery," he said. "Then I need to head out. The Double Star is expecting me." Hannah felt a spike of panic. "You are leaving. I have a job." "Hannah, but the land office." "I will come back for that," he said. "Get settled. I will be back in an hour to walk you over there." He tipped his hat, a formal, distant gesture, and led the horse away. Hannah watched him go, feeling exposed and singular in the cold wind. The land office was a dusty room that smelled of ink and dry paper. The clerk, a balding man with ink-stained fingers, looked at Hannah's documents with open skepticism. "This deed is in Thomas Kincaid's name," he said, peering over his spectacles. "I am his widow," Hannah said. She stood straight, leaning on her crutch, Cole standing like a sentinel a few feet behind her. "Do you have proof of marriage? And proof of death?" Hannah laid the papers on the desk. The clerk picked them up, turning them over. He glanced at Cole, then back at Hannah. "There have been rumors, Mrs. Kincaid," he said oily. "The McGraw family has expressed concern about the validity of this claim. They say the death was suspicious. The death was natural," Cole said. His voice filled the small room. "And the claim is valid. File the damn paper." The clerk flinched. He picked up his pen. "Very well, but I must warn you, until the probate is fully settled." "Just file it," Cole snarled. The clerk scratched his signature into the ledger. Hannah felt a wave of relief so strong she almost collapsed. It was done. Her name was on the book. The door banged open. A boy, breathless and red-faced, burst in. "Mr. Henderson," he shouted to the clerk. "Mr. Henderson, the telegraph just clicked. The McGraw brothers are coming in from the railhead. They sent a wire." The clerk looked up, pale. "What does it say?" The boy looked at Hannah, his eyes wide. "It says they are bringing the sheriff from the county seat. They say they have proof that Mrs. Kincaid is a murderess and a thief, and they are coming to see her hang." The room went silent. The tick of the wall clock sounded like a hammer. Hannah gripped the edge of the counter. The room spun. "Murderess!" Cole stepped forward. He put a hand on Hannah's shoulder to steady her. "Let's go," he said quietly. They walked out into the street. The mood in the town had changed. Before, it was disdain. Now, it was excitement. People were gathering in knots, whispering. The McGraws were coming. There would be a show. Cole walked Hannah back to the boarding house. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the mud. In the hallway, outside her door, Hannah stopped. She turned to Cole. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. "They are coming," she whispered. "They are bringing the sheriff." "It is just talk," Cole said, though his eyes were worried. "They are trying to scare you into running. I cannot face them alone." "Cole." She reached out and grabbed the front of his jacket. "Please," she said, "do not go back to the ranch. Not tonight." Cole looked down at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the trust. She was not asking the law to protect her. She was asking him. He felt the pull of the trail. He knew he should leave. If he stayed, if he stood between her and the McGraws, he would be crossing a line he could never uncross. He would be taking on a war that wasn't his. But then he looked at her mouth, trembling slightly, and he remembered the way she had felt against his side in the snow. He covered her hand with his. "I am not going anywhere, Hannah," he said. The air in the hallway grew heavy. The panic in Hannah's chest mixed with a sudden, overwhelming surge of longing. She stepped closer. She tilted her head up. They stood there in the dim light, the dust motes dancing between them. Cole's hand moved up to her arm. He wanted to pull her in. He wanted to kiss the fear out of her. He wanted to claim her, right here, before the whole damn town. His eyes searched hers, asking a silent question. "Are you ready?" Hannah's breath caught. She didn't flinch this time. She leaned in, just a fraction. Cole's hand tightened on her arm. He leaned down. Then the front door of the boarding house opened downstairs. "And Mrs." Lang's voice rang out. Cole froze. He closed his eyes for a second, a look of pain crossing his face. He stepped back. He let go of her arm. "Lock your door." "Hannah," he said, his voice husky. "I will be in the room at the end of the hall. If you need me, you scream." He turned and walked away before he could change his mind, his boots heavy on the floorboards, leaving her standing alone in the shadows with her heart beating like a war drum. The arrival of the McGraw brothers was a pageant of calculated intimidation. They rode into Bitter Creek 3 days after Hannah and Cole, coming down the main street not as travelers, but as conquerors. There were 3 of them, Silas, Caleb, and John, mounted on grain-fed bay horses that shone like polished mahogany, their tack gleaming with silver conchos. Silas, the eldest, rode in front. He wore a fine wool frock coat that cost more than a ranch hand made in a year, and his hat was blocked in a severe, flat-crowned style. His face was a mask of pious grief, but his eyes were hard and dry as river stones. They did not look like men in mourning. They looked like bankers coming to foreclose on a mortgage. The town of Bitter Creek, starved for spectacle and deferential to money, came out to watch. Men stepped out of the saloon, wiping foam from their mustaches. Women paused on the boardwalks, clutching their shawls. They watched as the McGraws dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, tying their horses with arrogant slowness. Within an hour, the narrative had been set. The brothers stood on the boardwalk, accepting condolences with grave nods, their voices carrying clearly in the thin winter air. "It is a tragedy," Silas told a gathering crowd. "Our brother was a good man, a gentleman. To think he was nursing a viper in his own house. We only want justice for Thomas. We only want to see that the woman who drove him to his grave does not profit from his murder." The word murder rippled through the crowd like a drop of ink in water. It transformed Hannah from a stranger into a villain. And the town, bored by the long winter, drank it down like cheap whiskey. Sheriff Miller was a man whose authority hung loosely on him, like an ill-fitting coat. He was pot-bellied and tired, a man who preferred quiet days and easy fines. The McGraws made him nervous, but their money made him attentive. He sent a deputy to fetch Hannah within 2 hours of their arrival. When Hannah walked into the office, leaning on her ash wood crutch, Cole was right beside her. The sheriff looked up from his desk, his eyes darting to the gun on Cole's hip, then back to Hannah. "Mrs. Kincaid," Miller said, not offering her a chair. "We have some new information regarding your husband's death." Hannah stood tall, though her bad leg was throbbing. "What information?" Silas McGraw was sitting in the corner, his legs crossed. He did not stand. He looked at Hannah with a mixture of disgust and triumph. "Show her." "Sheriff." Silas said smoothie. Miller cleared his throat. He picked up a piece of paper from his desk. It was creased and stained, as if it had been carried in a pocket for a long time. "The family has provided a letter," Miller said, "written by Thomas Kincaid to his brother Silas, dated 2 weeks before he died." He held it up. "It says here that he was afraid for his life. Mrs. Kincaid. He writes that you had become unstable, that you were prone to fits of rage. He says, if I am found dead, look to the woman in my kitchen, for she has a heart of ice and a hand for poison." Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. "It is a lie," she whispered. Thomas could barely write his own name. He never wrote a letter in his life. Silas stood up, brushing lint from his lapel. "My brother was a private man," Silas said. "He was ashamed of his wife's madness. He wrote to me for help. It is a forgery," Hannah cried, her voice rising. "You wrote that. Silas, you hated me from the day I married him because I was poor and I had a mind of my own." Sheriff Miller slammed his hand on the desk. "Enough." He looked at Hannah with tired, cynical eyes. "Mrs. Kincaid, the accusations are serious. Poisoning, theft of property, and now fleeing the jurisdiction." "I was not fleeing," Hannah said. "I was coming to file my claim." "So you say," the sheriff drawled. "But you came riding in here with a hired gun, half dead, dragging a story about a blizzard. It looks suspicious. Ma'am, it looks like a woman running from a crime who got caught by the weather." Cole stepped forward. The floorboards creaked under his boots. "She was under a wagon," Cole said. His voice was low, devoid of the panic that threaded through Hannah's. "I found her buried in 5 feet of snow. She had a broken leg and frozen feet. If she was running, she paid a hell of a price for it. And I saw the document she carries. A doctor's statement." The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "We have heard about this doctor. A drunkard who left town. Likely paid off." Cole took another step. The sheriff's hand drifted toward his own weapon, but he stopped when he saw the look in Cole's eyes. It was a predator's look, still focused and utterly without fear. "You are twisting the rope before you have even held the trial. Miller," Cole said, "you are taking the word of a man who stands to gain 1,000 acres against a widow who has nothing but the clothes on her back." "I do not like your tone, Cowboy," Miller snapped. "And I do not like your justice," Cole replied. Silas McGraw stepped forward, sneering. "This is exactly what I mean." "Sheriff," Silas said, "she keeps company with ruffians. Look at him. A scar-faced drifter, probably the one who helped her do the deed." Cole turned his head slowly to look at Silas. "Careful," Cole said softly. Silas took a step back, his bravado faltering for a second. The sheriff stood up. "Get her out of here." "But Mrs. Kincaid, you do not leave town. You do not leave the boarding house without my say-so. We are sending a wire to the territorial marshal. Until then, you are a suspect." Hannah turned and walked out, her head high, but her hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped her crutch. Cole followed her, his shadow long and dark across the threshold. The poison of gossip moved faster than the wind. By the next morning, Hannah could feel it everywhere she went. She went to the general store to buy thread to mend her dress. The bell above the door chimed, and the conversation inside died instantly. 2 women standing by the fabric bolts turned to look at her. They were respectable women, wives of merchants, wearing clean bonnets and severe expressions. Hannah walked to the counter. She could hear the whisper as she passed, "Slept in a cabin for a week. Alone with him. No better than a camp follower." The shopkeeper took her money without looking her in the eye, placing the change on the counter rather than in her hand, as if her touch might carry a disease. Hannah took her thread and walked out, her spine rigid, feeling the stairs like knives in her back. It was worse in the saloon, where Cole had gone to hear the news. The men there were less whispered, more crude. "I heard she was pinned under that wagon." A man laughed, leaning on the bar. "I bet she knows a thing or two about being pinned." Cole, standing at the end of the bar with the untouched whiskey, set his glass down. The sound of the glass hitting the wood was sharp enough to cut the laughter. He turned. The room went quiet. He did not say a word. He just looked at the man who had spoken, holding the gaze until the man looked down, shuffled his feet, and muttered an apology into his beer. But Cole could not fight every word. He could not shoot a whisper. He knew, with a sinking dread, that his presence was only making it worse. Every time he walked beside her, every time he opened a door for her, he was confirming the town's belief that Hannah was a fallen woman. Sunday came with a gray, suffocating sky. "I am going to church," Hannah said, tying her bonnet strings with trembling fingers. Cole stood in the doorway of her room at the boarding house. "Hannah, do not, they will only use it to hurt you. I will not hide," she said fiercely. "If I hide, I admit I have done something wrong. I am a widow, and I will sit in the pew and pray for my husband." Cole sighed, a heavy, frustrated sound. "Then I am coming with you." The church was a small white building with drafty windows and hard pine benches. When Hannah entered, the hum of conversation severed as if cut by a knife. She walked down the center aisle, the thud of her crutch echoing in the silence. There was an empty space in the third pew. As she moved toward it, the woman sitting there, the banker's wife, gathered her skirts and slid aggressively to the far end, leaving 3 feet of empty wood between them. Hannah sat. She stared straight ahead at the plain wooden cross. Cole did not sit. He stood at the back of the church, his hat in his hands, his back against the wall. He watched the backs of the congregation's heads. He saw the McGraw brothers sitting in the front row, heads bowed in false piety. The preacher was a thin man with a voice that whined like a saw blade. He did not name Hannah, but he did not have to. "We live in a time of sin," the preacher intoned, leaning over the pulpit, "a time where the sanctity of marriage is mocked. We see the influence of Jezebel in our own streets. Women who cast aside their vows for the pleasures of the flesh. Women who lay with strangers and bring rot into the community." He looked directly at Hannah. "Beware the false widow," he thundered. "For her tears are water, but her heart is a snare." Hannah sat frozen. She felt the heat rising in her neck, burning her cheeks. She could feel the eyes of the town boring into her. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. But she sat still, her knuckles white where she gripped the pew in front of her. At the back of the room, Cole's hands crumpled the brim of his hat. A red haze was forming at the edges of his vision. He wanted to walk down that aisle and drag the preacher out of the pulpit. He wanted to burn the building down. He saw Hannah's shoulders shaking, just slightly, a tiny, imperceptible vibration of humiliation. He took a step forward. Then the service ended. The preacher said a final amen, and the spell broke. Hannah stood up and turned to leave. The congregation parted for her, not out of respect, but out of aversion. She walked the gauntlet, her head high, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Outside, the air was cold and clean, a relief after the stifling judgment of the sanctuary. Hannah hurried around the side of the church, heading for the shortcut back to the boarding house. She needed to be inside. She needed to hide. "Mrs. Kincaid." The voice was low and oily. She stopped. Silas McGraw stepped out from behind a stack of firewood. He was alone. He looked big in his frock coat, blocking the path. "Get out of my way." "Silas," Hannah said. He stepped closer. "You are making a spectacle of yourself. Hannah, coming to church, pretending you are decent. It is embarrassing." "I have a right to be here." "You have no rights," Silas hissed. "You are a leech. Thomas made a mistake marrying you, and we are going to correct it." He reached out and grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into the soft flesh above her elbow, hard enough to bruise. "Sign the deed over," he said, his voice dropping to a menace. "Do it today. If you do, we will drop the inquiry. You can leave town. Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of." "Let me go," Hannah cried, trying to pull away. "You are hurting yourself. Hannah, and you are hurting that cowboy. Do you think we won't deal with him too?" Suddenly, Silas was wrenched backward. It happened so fast Hannah barely saw it. One moment Silas was gripping her arm. The next, he was flying through the air. He slammed into the woodpile, logs clattering down around him. Cole stood there, He was not wearing his gun belt. He had left it at the boarding house out of respect for the church, but he did not need it. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He did not wait for Silas to stand. He stepped in, grabbed Silas by the lapels of his expensive coat, and hauled him up. "I told you," Cole growled. He drove his fist into Silas's face. The sound of bone on bone was sickeningly loud. Silas's head snapped back. Blood sprayed from his nose, bright red against the white snow. Cole hit him again. And again. It was not a fight. It was a demolition. It was 10 years of range war violence, 10 years of sleeping in the snow, 10 years of hating men like Silas McGraw, all pouring out in a flurry of blows. "Cole!" Hannah screamed. "Cole, stop!" Silas slumped against the woodpile, groaning, his face a ruin. Cole drew his arm back for another strike, his eyes blind to everything but the target. "Cole, please! You are killing him!" Hannah grabbed Cole's arm. She threw her weight against him. He stopped. His chest was heaving. He looked down at Hannah, his eyes wild and unfocused. Then he looked at his own knuckles, split and bleeding. He looked at Silas, who was spitting teeth into the snow. A crowd had gathered at the corner of the church. They stared in horror. They did not see a man defending a woman. They saw the scarred drifter, the gunman, beating a respected citizen to a pulp on the Lord's Day. "He is an animal," a woman whispered loudly. Cole straightened his jacket. He looked at the crowd. They shrank back from him. He looked at Hannah. He saw the fear in her eyes, not for Silas, but of him, of the violence he carried so easily. "Get the sheriff." Someone shouted. The arrest was inevitable. Sheriff Miller came to the boarding house an hour later with 2 deputies. He did not look happy, but he looked determined. "I have no choice now. Mrs. Kincaid," Miller said, "assault and battery. And with the murder investigation pending, I have to take you in." "Me?" Hannah asked, bewildered. Cole hit him. "You are an accessory," Miller said. "And you are a flight risk. The McGraws are pressing charges. They handcuffed her. The metal was cold against her wrists. They did not handcuff Cole. The sheriff knew better than to try that while Cole was wearing his gun. Instead, he gave Cole a warning. "You walk away, son. You stay out of this, or I will have the marshals hunt you down." Cole stood on the porch, his hand hovering near his pistol. He could draw. He could drop all 3 of them before they cleared leather. He could take Hannah and run. But then what? A life on the run? Sleeping in caves? Hunted like wolves? She deserved better. He let his hand drop. He watched them lead her away. The jail cell was a stone box in the basement of the sheriff's office. It smelled of mildew and unwashed bodies. They took Hannah's crutch and locked the heavy iron door. She sat on the cot, the thin mattress smelling of straw. She pulled her knees up to her chest. It was cold, a damp chill that settled in her lungs. She looked at the bars. They were thick, black iron. They looked like the lines drawn by society. The lines between rich and poor, between men and women, between the respectable and the ruined. She was on the wrong side of all of them. Night fell. The jail was quiet. Hannah dozed fitfully, waking to the sound of a key in the outer door. A shadow fell across her cell. "Hannah." She scrambled off the cot, limping to the bars. Cole, he was standing there in the dim light of the corridor. He looked exhausted. His knuckles were wrapped in a bloody rag. He had bribed the night deputy, or perhaps simply scared him into taking a walk. He reached through the bars. She reached out. Their fingers touched. His hand was warm. Hers was ice cold. He wrapped his fingers around hers, holding on tight. "I am sorry," he whispered. "I made it worse. I lost my temper, and I made it worse. You protected me." Hannah said, "He was hurting me. I played right into their hands," Cole said bitterly. "Now they have got a reason to lock you up. They are saying I am your enforcer." Hannah pressed her forehead against the cold iron bars, close to his hand. "I was afraid in here," she admitted, "until you came." Cole looked at her. Her face was pale, striped by the shadows of the bars. He felt a surge of love so painful it felt like a wound. He wanted to tear the door off its hinges. But he knew that strength wasn't enough this time. "My life is tangled with yours." "Hannah," he said, his voice low. "I tried to walk away. God knows I tried. But I cannot. I don't want you to walk away." Hannah whispered, "But I cannot ask you to ruin yourself. They will hang you if you stay. It is already too late for me." Cole said, "I am just a gun hand, but you have a life to live." They stood there for a long time, fingers interlaced through the iron, breathing the same stale air. The desire between them was no longer a spark. It was a steady, burning coal. It was the only warm thing in the dark. The next morning, the door opened. It wasn't the sheriff. It was Mrs. Lang. The boarding house owner walked in, wearing her Sunday best and a look of grim determination. She carried a reticule. Sheriff Miller followed her, looking annoyed. "Open it, Miller." "Mrs." Lang said. Miller sighed and unlocked the cell door. "You are lucky." "Mrs. Kincaid." Miller said, "Mrs. Lang has posted your bail. $500. It is a fortune, Mrs. Lang sniffed. "It is my savings, and I expect to get it back when this nonsense is cleared up. Come along." Hannah stumbled out. She looked at Mrs. Lang, tears filling her eyes. "Why?" "Because I know a bully when I see one," Mrs. Lang said. "And I know a grieving widow when I see one. And Silas McGraw is a snake." They walked out into the sunlight. Cole was waiting on the street. He stepped forward, relief washing over his face. The sheriff stepped in front of him. "Hold on," Miller said. He looked at Cole. "Mrs. Kincaid is out on bail. She stays in town, but you, Cowboy, you are done here." Cole went still. "I am not leaving her. You are the reason she is in this mess," Miller said bluntly. "Look at the town. Look at the faces. Every minute you stay here, you are proving the McGraws right. You are the gunman. You are the scandal. If you care about this woman, you will get out of her life. If you stay, I will arrest you for the assault on Silas, and I will make sure it sticks." "And then who is going to help her?" Cole looked at Hannah. He saw the way the townspeople were staring at them. He saw the fear in Mrs. Lang's eyes. He realized the sheriff was right. He was the anchor dragging her down. His reputation, his violence, his very presence was the weapon the McGraws were using against her. He looked at Hannah. "He is right," Cole said. Hannah's eyes went wide. "No, Cole, no." Cole's face closed up. He put the mask back on, the cold, indifferent mask of the drift rider. "I have to go. Hannah." "I have a job at the Double Star. I cannot afford to sit in a jail cell." He was lying. She could see it in his eyes. He was ripping his own heart out to save her. "You are leaving me?" she whispered. "After everything?" "It is better this way," Cole said, his voice flat. "You fight the legal fight. Mrs. Lang will help you. I am just trouble." He turned his back on her. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. He walked to his horse, mounted up, and rode out of town without looking back. Hannah stood on the boardwalk, watching him go. She felt a coldness settle in her chest that was deeper than the blizzard. He was gone, the one person who knew her, the one person who had saved her. She felt abandoned. She knew why he did it, but it still felt like he had taken the air with him. 2 days later, the despair set in. Without Cole, Hannah was isolated. Mrs. Lang was kind, but she was busy. The town was hostile. The legal fees were mounting, and the hearing was set for the end of the week. Then Silas McGraw came to the boarding house. He did not come with threats this time. He came with a document. He sat in the parlor, looking at Hannah with a shark-like smile. His face was bruised purple from Cole's fists, which gave Hannah a grim satisfaction. But his eyes were victorious. "He is gone." "Hannah," Silas said, "your cowboy ran, just like I said he would." Hannah said nothing. She stared at her hands. "Here's the offer," Silas said. He slid a paper across the table. "You sign a quitclaim on the homestead. You admit that the deed was confusing. In exchange, we drop the charges. We forget the poisoning accusation. We forget the assault. We even give you $50 for a stagecoach ticket east." Hannah looked at the paper. It was surrender. It was admitting that Thomas had won. It was admitting that the strong always ate the weak. "If I sign this," she said, her voice hollow, "I am saying I lied. If you don't sign it," Silas said, "you go to prison. And maybe you hang. Do you think a jury in this town will believe you over me? Without your protector?" Hannah looked around the room. It was wallpapered and polite. It was a prison. She thought of the cabin, the snow, the firelight, the feeling of Cole's hand on hers. That was the only real thing that had happened to her, and now it was gone. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook. She felt something break inside her. It was the small, stubborn flame of hope she had carried since she crawled out from under that wagon. It flickered and died. "I will sign," she whispered. Silas smiled. A smart choice. She touched the pen to the paper. The ink bloomed on the page. Dark and final. She signed her name. Hannah Kincaid. She had bought her safety, but she had sold her soul. And as she looked out the window at the empty street where Cole had ridden away, she knew she had never been more alone. The trail away from Bitter Creek was a ribbon of hard-packed snow winding through the sagebrush, leading south toward the open range of the Double Star. Cole rode with his hat pulled low, his eyes fixed on the horizon, but his mind was back in that jail cell. Seeing Hannah's pale face pressed against the iron bars, he told himself he was doing the right thing. He told himself that a man with blood on his hands could only stain a woman like Hannah Kincaid. He was a hired gun, a drift rider, a man who slept in line shacks and carried the ghosts of the Lincoln County War in his saddlebags. She was a landowner, a widow, a woman who smelled of lavender and resilience. Leaving was the only way to save her reputation. But the farther he rode, the heavier the silence became. The wind rushing past his ears sounded like an accusation. Coward. He camped that night at a rough dugout used by freighters, 10 miles south of town. The shelter was little more than a hole in the side of a hill, reinforced with logs. Inside, a fire was already burning. 2 men sat by the flames, sharing a bottle of rot-gut whiskey. They were range bums, men who drifted from payroll to payroll, their faces weathered like old leather. They nodded as Cole ducked in, eyeing his gun belt but saying nothing. Cole poured himself a cup of coffee from their pot and sat in the shadows. He did not want to talk. He wanted to drink the coffee, sleep for 3 hours, and keep riding until he forgot the feeling of Hannah's hand in his. The men ignored him, their voices low and rough. "I tell you, the McGraws have got it sewn up," one man said, wiping his mouth with a dirty sleeve. "They have got the sheriff in their pocket, and that little widow is as good as hanged." Cole's hand froze halfway to his mouth. The other man laughed. "I heard she signed the paper. Or she is going to." Silas McGraw was bragging in the saloon that he broke her. Said she was crying like a lost calf. She never stood a chance, the first man said. Not without that doctor. What was his name? Ellison. Yeah, Ellison. The McGraws paid him $500 to ride out. Silas was laughing about it. Said the old drunk took the gold and ran to the mining camps. Said he is hiding out in Silver Hollow, drinking himself blind while the widow takes the fall. Cole set his cup down. The tin clinked against a rock. The sound was sharp in the small space. Both men looked up. They saw the stranger in the shadows. They saw the way he was looking at them, like a wolf looking at a trapped deer. "Where is Silver Hollow?" Cole asked. His voice was quiet, but it filled the room. The first man swallowed. "Up north, in the Granite Peaks. About 2 days' ride if you push it." "Why?" Cole stood up. He kicked dirt over his coffee cup. "I missed a turn," he said. He walked out into the night. The wind was biting, carrying the scent of snow. He looked south, toward the ranch and the quiet, empty life he had chosen. Then he looked north, toward the jagged peaks where a man named Ellison was drinking away a woman's life. Cole swung into the saddle. He turned the roan horse's head. "Let's go," he whispered. The ride to Silver Hollow was a descent into hell. The country grew steeper, the air thinner. The trail was a goat path clinging to the side of granite cliffs, slick with ice and dusted with fresh snow. Cole rode as if the devil were snapping at his heels. He did not stop for food. He slept in the saddle, dozing in fitful bursts while the horse picked its way through the dark. He crossed the Powder River at a ford where the ice had broken. The water was black and numbing, swirling around the horse's belly. The roan stumbled, fighting the current, and for a moment Cole thought they would both be swept under. He gripped the mane, shouting encouragement, urging the beast forward until they scrambled up the far bank. Shivering and coated in slush, he saw the tracks of a mountain lion stalking the ridge line. He heard the howl of wolves echoing in the canyons, but he did not stop. The image of Hannah haunted him. He saw her signing that paper. He saw the look of betrayal in her eyes when he had ridden away. He had told himself he was protecting her, but he saw it now for what it was. He had been afraid, not of the McGraws, but of the way she made him feel. He had been afraid of having something to lose. Now, he was terrified he had already lost it. He reached Silver Hollow late on the second day. It was a scar of a town, a collection of canvas tents and shacks clinging to a ravine near a silver vein. It smelled of sulfur, unwashed bodies, and desperation. Cole left his exhausted horse at the livery and walked into the only saloon. It was a canvas tent with a plank bar. "I am looking for a doctor," Cole said to the barkeep. "Name of Ellison?" The barkeep jerked a thumb toward the back. "He is in the surgery tent, though he does more drinking than doctoring these days." Cole found the tent. He pushed the flap aside. Doctor Ellison was sitting on a crate, staring at a bottle of whiskey. He was a small man with a fraying coat and shaking hands. He looked up, his eyes watery and red-rimmed. "We are closed," Ellison mumbled. "Come back when I am sober." Cole stepped inside and let the flap fall shut. The light was dim. "You are sober enough to listen," Cole said. Ellison squinted. "Who are you?" "I am the man who is going to take you back to Bitter Creek," Cole said. Ellison laughed. A dry, hacking sound. "I'm not going back there. That is a bad place for my health. The air does not agree with me." "The McGraws paid you," Cole said. He took a step closer. $500 to let an innocent woman hang. Ellison flinched. He reached for the bottle. It was business. Just business. She was doomed anyway. "She is going to lose everything," Cole said. His voice dropped, low and dangerous. "They are calling her a murderess. They are saying she poisoned her husband. And you know she didn't." Ellison's hands shook. He took a drink, the liquor spilling down his chin. Thomas Kincaid was a brute. He died of pneumonia and his own stupidity. I wrote it down. "Where's the paper?" Cole asked. "I left it. I burned the copy. I just want it out." Cole moved. He crossed the space in a single stride and kicked the crate out from under the doctor. Ellison sprawled in the dirt, the bottle rolling away. Cole crouched down. He grabbed Ellison by the lapels of his coat and hauled him up. "Listen to me," Cole snarled. "There is a woman back there who is standing alone against a whole town. She has got no money. She has got no friends. The only thing she had was a piece of paper with your name on it, and they called it a forgery." He shook the doctor. "You are going to come back with me? You are going to stand up in that court, and you are going to tell the truth. They will kill me," Ellison whimpered. "The McGraws." "I will kill you if you don't," Cole lied, but as he looked at the pathetic man, his anger shifted. He saw the fear. He saw the shame. Cole loosened his grip. "Look at me, Ellison." The doctor looked up. "I have done things I am not proud of," Cole said quietly. "I have walked away when I should have stayed. I have killed men for money, and it eats at you. It hollows you out until there is nothing left but the whiskey." Cole's eyes were intense, burning with a strange light. "This is your chance. Doc, you can die a drunk in a tent, or you can ride back there and save a life. You can be a man again." Ellison stared at him. He saw the scar on Cole's face. He saw the exhaustion. He saw a man who had ridden through hell for something he believed in. "I kept the logbook," Ellison whispered. "I didn't burn it. I have the original patient log. It details the bruises on her arms. It details the cause of death." "Get it," Cole said. "We ride in 10 minutes. In Bitter Creek." The walls were closing in. Hannah sat in the parlor of the boarding house. Her trunk was packed, Not because she wanted to leave, but because Silas McGraw had made it clear that once the final hearing was over, she was to be on the next stagecoach or in a cell. The town had turned its back completely. When she walked to the post office, women crossed the street to avoid her shadow. Children threw mud at her skirts and ran away giggling. The isolation was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest until it was hard to breathe. Mrs. Lang brought her a cup of tea. "Drink this." "Hannah," the older woman said gently, "you look like a ghost. I feel like one." Hannah said. She looked out the window. The street was empty. "He is not coming back, Mrs. Lang said softly. "I know," Hannah said. "I know." But deep down, a treacherous part of her heart was still scanning the horizon, waiting for a roan horse and a buffalo coat. The pressure from the McGraws had become suffocating. Silas had stopped by yesterday. He had leaned close, smelling of bay rum and arrogance, and suggested that perhaps she didn't need to leave town. Perhaps, if she was reasonable, she could stay as a housekeeper for the McGraw ranch. The implication made Hannah's skin crawl. It was slavery. It was walking back into the cage she had escaped, but this time with no rights and no name. "I would rather rot in prison," she had told him. Silas had just smiled. "We will see what the judge says tomorrow." The day of the hearing dawned cold and gray. A few flakes of snow drifted in the air, a reminder that winter was not done with them. The courthouse was packed. It seemed the whole town had turned out to see the final act of the drama. They wanted to see the widow broken. They wanted to see the McGraws win, because in Bitter Creek, money always won. And it was comforting to see the world working as expected. Hannah walked in alone. She wore her best black dress, mended and brushed. She leaned on her cane, her head high, but her hands were trembling so badly she had to clasp them together to hide it. She sat at the defendant's table. The sheriff stood nearby, looking bored. The McGraw brothers sat in the front row, looking like buzzards on a fence rail. The judge was a circuit rider from Cheyenne, a man with a white beard and little patience for small-town squabbles. "Case of the estate of Thomas Kincaid," the judge announced. "We are here to finalize the disposition of the land claim and address the charges of fraud and attempted poisoning brought against the widow." Silas McGraw stood up. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "we have been lenient. We offered Mrs. Kincaid a generous settlement. She has refused. We have witnessed testimony that she purchased arsenic. We have letters from the deceased fearing for his life. We ask that the deed be transferred to the McGraw family and that Mrs. Kincaid be remanded to custody." The judge looked at Hannah. "Do you have counsel, Mrs. Kincaid?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you have evidence to refute these claims?" Hannah stood up. Her voice was thin. "I have my word. Your Honor, my husband died of sickness. I never harmed him." The courtroom murmured. "Liar. Witch. Your word against the leading citizens of this county," the judge said, checking his watch. "Without corroboration, I am inclined to rule for the plaintiffs. The document provided by the brothers seems authentic." Hannah felt the floor tilt. It was over. The gavel was about to come down, and her life would be extinguished. She looked at the paper on the judge's desk. It was the end of her hope. "I will sign," she whispered. "Just let me go." The judge pushed the paper forward. "Step up and sign the transfer, Mrs. Kincaid." Hannah moved toward the bench. She picked up the pen. The nib scratched against the inkwell. Suddenly, the double doors at the back of the courtroom flew open with a crash that shook the walls. A blast of cold wind swept into the room, swirling the papers on the judge's desk. "Stop!" The voice was a thunderclap. Every head turned. Cole stood in the doorway. He looked like something wild. His coat was covered in frozen mud. His face was gaunt, his eyes burning with a terrifying light. He was supporting a smaller man beside him, a man who looked ready to faint. Cole strode down the center aisle, dragging the man with him. The crowd parted, shrinking away from the sheer force of his presence. Cole marched up to the railing. He slammed a heavy, leather-bound book onto the judge's desk. "This is the evidence," Cole rasped. "And this is the witness." Silas McGraw jumped to his feet. "Sheriff, arrest that man. He is a drifter, a troublemaker." "Sit down. Silas," Cole roared. He turned to the judge. "This is Dr. Ellison, the man who treated Thomas Kincaid, the man the McGraws paid to disappear." The judge looked at Ellison. "Is this true?" Ellison was shaking. He looked at Silas, who was glaring at him with pure murder. Then he looked at Cole. Cole nodded once, a steadying anchor. Ellison straightened his spine. "Yes, Your Honor," Ellison said, his voice gaining strength. "It is true. I attended Thomas Kincaid in his final illness. He died of acute pneumonia brought on by alcohol exposure." He opened the book on the desk. "Here is my log, dated November 3rd. Patient deceased. Cause pneumonia. Note, patient expressed regret for beating his wife. Note, Mrs. Kincaid shows signs of severe bruising on arms and face." The courtroom erupted. The murmur turned into a roar of shock. "Silence," the judge shouted, banging his gavel. Ellison pointed a trembling finger at Silas. "Silas McGraw came to me. He offered me $500 to leave town. He said he was going to take the land back, and he didn't want any interference. He told me to write a statement saying it looked like poison, or I would never practice medicine in this territory again." The truth hung in the air, naked and undeniable. The townspeople looked at the McGraws. The veneer of respectability cracked and fell away, revealing the rot underneath. The judge looked at the logbook. He looked at Silas. "This is perjury, Mr. McGraw, an extortion." Silas's face turned purple. "He is lying. That drunkard is lying. They are in it together. Caleb McGraw, the youngest brother, panicked." He saw their power dissolving. He saw the jail cell waiting. He reached inside his coat. "He has got a gun!" Someone screamed. Cole moved before the thought had even formed. He shoved Hannah behind him, shielding her body with his own. Caleb pulled a revolver. He wasn't aiming. He was just lashing out. "Drop it!" Cole shouted. Caleb fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. A splinter of wood flew from the judge's bench. Cole drew. It was a fluid, practiced motion, the muscle memory of a man who had survived a war. He did not fire to kill. He fired to stop. His bullet struck Caleb's shoulder. Caleb screamed, spinning around, the gun clattering to the floor. Silas lunged for the fallen weapon. Cole cocked the hammer again. "Don't do it, Silas," Cole warned. His voice was flat, deadly. Silas grabbed the gun. He raised it, his eyes insane with rage, aiming not at Cole, but at Hannah. Cole fired. The bullet took Silas in the chest. He was thrown backward, crashing into the defense table. He hit the floor and did not move. Silence slammed back into the room. The smoke drifted in the air, acrid and biting. Cole stood there, his gun smoking, his chest heaving. He looked at the man he had just killed. He felt the old sickness rise in his gut, the familiar weight of death. He had crossed the line again. He was a killer again. But then he felt Hannah's hand on his back. She was alive. She was safe. Sheriff Miller finally moved. He pulled his own gun, but he pointed it at the third brother, John, who was cowering with his hands up. "It is over," the sheriff said, his voice shaking. An hour later, the dust had settled. The judge, shaken but authoritative, had reviewed the logbook. He had declared the charges against Hannah dismissed with prejudice. He had signed the order validating her deed to the homestead. Silas was dead. Caleb was in the doctor's care, under guard. John was in a cell. The judge called Hannah and Cole to the bench. "Mrs. Kincaid," the judge said, "the land is yours. The law is satisfied." He looked at Cole. "And you, sir, it was self-defense, and defense of another. There will be no charges, but—" The judge leaned forward. "You brought violence into my court. You saved her life, but you killed a man to do it. This town, they won't forget that. You have brought trouble." "Son?" Cole holstered his gun. He looked tired. Trouble was already here. "Judge, I just finished it." He turned to Hannah. "Let's go." They walked out of the courthouse into the thin, cold sunlight. The street was full of people. but they hung back, giving them a wide berth. They looked at Hannah with new eyes, not with scorn, but with a mixture of shame and awe, and they looked at Cole with fear. They reached the edge of the boardwalk. The wind ruffled Hannah's skirts. She stopped and turned to him. Her face was pale, her eyes searching his. "You came back," she whispered. "I heard they were going to hang you," Cole said roughly. He looked away, watching the mountains. "I couldn't let that happen." "You left me, Cole. You rode away. I thought I was saving you," he said. "I thought if I left, the talk would stop. I thought I was the poison." Hannah stepped closer. She dropped her cane. She didn't need it for this. "You were never the poison," she said fiercely. "You were the antidote." She reached out and grabbed the lapels of his dirty, blood-stained coat. She shook him, anger and relief pouring out of her. "Don't you ever decide what is best for me again. Cole, I choose. Do you hear me? I choose." Cole looked down at her. He saw the fire in her eyes. He saw the woman who had survived the blizzard, the wagon, and the town. "I hear you," he said. Hannah pulled him down. She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce, desperate, tasting of tears and smoke and survival. It was a claiming. She poured all her fear, all her desire, all her gratitude into it. She kissed him in front of the judge, in front of the sheriff, in front of the whole damn town. Cole stood rigid for a second, stunned. Then he broke. He wrapped his arms around her, crushing her to him. He kissed her back with a hunger that had been starving for years. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Cole framed her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed her cheeks, wiping away the tears. His touch was gentle, so gentle it made her heart ache. "I have got you," he whispered, echoing the words he had said in the snow. Hannah looked at him, her eyes shining. "And I have got you," she said. Cole looked over her head at the town that watched them. He looked at the open range beyond. "Let's go home." "Hannah," she nodded. "Take me home." The victory in the courtroom was absolute, but the judgment of Bitter Creek was a sentence with no parole. The gavel had banged down. The McGraw brothers had been broken, and the deed to the Kincaid homestead was legally Hannah's. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the air in the town remained thin and difficult to breathe. Hannah walked down the boardwalk, her head high, the cane tapping a steady rhythm against the wood. She saw Mrs. Gable and the pastor's wife coming toward her. She prepared a polite nod, a peace offering to the women who had once welcomed her to the quilting circle. They saw her. Their eyes hardened. They crossed the muddy street, lifting their hems high to avoid the muck, choosing the filth of the road over the proximity of the scandal. Hannah heard the words drift back to her on the wind. Living in a man's pocket, blood on her skirts, shameless. It did not matter that the judge had declared it self-defense. It did not matter that she was the victim. To Bitter Creek, she was the woman who had brought violence into their quiet lives. She was the woman who had slept in a line shack with a gunman. She was marked. Even the safety of the boarding house felt fragile. Mrs. Lang was staunch in her defense, but the other boarders stopped talking when Hannah entered the dining room. They ate quickly, eyes on their plates, treating her like a contagion. Cole felt it too. He saw the way men in the saloon gave him a wide berth, not out of respect, but out of fear. He was the killer. He was the wolf in the fold. One evening, Cole found Hannah sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in a shawl, staring out at the darkening street. She looked smaller than she had in the courtroom. The fight had drained out of her, replaced by a weary endurance. "We cannot stay here," Cole said quietly. He leaned against the railing, rolling a cigarette with one hand. Hannah did not look at him. "I have nowhere else to go. Cole, the homestead is mine now, but the thought of living there, in Thomas's house, with the McGraws as neighbors," she shuddered. "I have a place," Cole said. Hannah looked up. "You do?" Cole struck a match on his boot heel. The flare illuminated his scarred face. "I bought a deed 5 years ago. from a prospector who was broke and needing whiskey money. It is not much, 300 acres in a high basin, west of here, up near the Blacktail Range. He took a drag of the cigarette, blowing the smoke into the cold air. I never did anything with it. I figured a man like me had no business putting down roots. I thought I would die in a saddle or in a ditch somewhere. But it is there. It has water. It has timber. And it is far enough away from here that nobody cares who we are. Hannah looked at him. She felt a sudden, sharp spike of fear. To leave the town was to leave the law, the stores, the fragile safety of civilization. To go with him into the wild was to tie herself to him completely. I just fought for my independence. Cole, she said softly, I just got my name back. If I go with you, I am just the woman following the man again. Cole turned to her. He dropped the cigarette and crushed it out. You are not following me, Hannah. We are riding together. And the land, I will put your name on the deed right next to mine. Half and half, partners. He looked at her with a steady, unblinking gaze. I am not asking you to be my housekeeper, and I am not asking you to be my mistress. I am asking you to help me build something that does not have the McGraw name or the Kincaid name on it. Something new. Hannah looked at the empty street. She looked at the closed doors of the houses where she was not welcome. Then she looked at the mountains in the distance, dark and silent against the stars. Show me, she said. They rode out 2 days later. The journey took them away from the rolling plains and into the broken country of the foothills. The snow was beginning to melt in the lower elevations, turning the creeks into rushing torrents of gray water. The basin lay tucked between two shoulders of granite, sheltered from the worst of the north wind. It was not a garden. It was rough country, studded with scrub pine and stubborn sage. But a creek cut through the center, clear and cold, and the grass pushing up through the melting drifts was thick and sweet. There was a cabin, if you could call it that. It was 3 walls and a sagging roof, abandoned years ago by the prospector. The door was gone, and snow had drifted into the corners. Hannah sat on her horse, looking at it. It was desolate. It was lonely. It was perfect. It needs work, Cole said, watching her face anxiously. The roof leaks. The logs are rotting on the south side. It needs everything, Hannah said. She dismounted, her boots sinking into the wet earth. She walked to the doorway and looked inside. She turned back to Cole, and for the first time in weeks, her smile reached her eyes. Where do we start? The work was brutal. Spring in the high country was a season of mud and muscle. They worked from the first gray light of dawn until the sun dipped behind the peaks. Cole felled trees, his axe ringing in the silent valley. Hannah stripped the bark, her hands raw and blistered despite the gloves he gave her. They hauled the logs together, straining against the ropes, their breath steaming in the cold air. There was no distinction between man's work and woman's work. There was only survival. Hannah mixed mud and straw to chink the gaps in the logs. Cole climbed the roof to lay fresh sod and pine boughs. They dug out the spring, clearing away years of silt until the water ran clear. The shared struggle created a language of its own. They moved around each other with an efficiency that bordered on dance. A hand steadied a ladder. Fingers brushed when passing a hammer. A shoulder pressed against a shoulder when they lifted a heavy beam. Every touch carried an electric weight. Hannah felt it constantly. The sight of Cole washing up at the creek, stripped to the waist, the water sluicing over his scarred back, made her throat go dry. She wanted him. She wanted to press her hands against that skin, to feel the heat of him. But when the sun went down and the world shrank to the circle of firelight in the cabin, the old ghosts returned. One night, Cole reached out to brush a smudge of soot from her cheek. Hannah flinched. It was a reflex, a twitch of the head, a sudden widening of the eyes. Cole froze. He pulled his hand back slowly. I'm sorry, Hannah whispered, staring at the fire. I hate it. I hate that I do that. Cole sat back on his heels. He did not look angry. He looked sad. It is a deep wound. Hannah, it takes time to heal. You do not expect a broken leg to carry weight the day the splint comes off. I'm afraid you will get tired of waiting, she admitted. I'm afraid you will realize I am broken and leave. Cole looked at her across the fire. I waited 10 years to find a reason to stop running, he said. I can wait a little longer for you to feel safe. The kiss happened a week later. They had spent the day wrestling a stubborn stump out of the ground near the creek, clearing space for a garden. They were both exhausted, covered in mud, aching in every joint. They stood by the fire, drying their clothes. The heat was flushing their skin. Hannah looked at Cole. He was watching her, his eyes dark and heavy. He took a step toward her. He did not reach out. He just stood there, letting her see him, letting her decide. Hannah did not back away. Cole moved slowly. He raised his hands and cupped her face. His palms were rough, calloused from the axe, but his touch was light as a moth's wing. He held her as if she were made of spun glass. He lowered his head. He kissed her. It was not a demand. It was a question. His mouth was warm and patient, lingering on hers, asking for entrance but not forcing it. Hannah felt a jolt of desire so strong her knees buckled. She gripped his wrists, anchoring herself. For a moment, she melted into him, opening her mouth, tasting him. Then, a log snapped in the fire. The sound was like a pistol shot. Hannah stiffened, her muscles locked. The memory of violence, of loud noises and pain, flashed through her mind. Cole stopped instantly. He did not pull away, but he stopped the kiss. He rested his forehead against hers, his breathing ragged. He kept his hands on her face, steadying her, grounding her in the present. I'm here, he whispered. It is just the fire. It is just me. Hannah trembled. I want to, she whispered, her voice breaking. Cole, I want to, but my body, it remembers. I know, Cole said. He pulled back enough to look her in the eye. Listen to me. Hannah, I am scared too. She looked at him, surprised. You? You are not scared of anything. I am scared of what is inside me, Cole said. I killed men. Hannah, I killed Silas McGraw. There is a violence in me. When I touch you, when I feel that want, I am terrified that I will be too rough. I am terrified that the killer will come out and I will hurt the only thing I have ever loved. Hannah stared at him. She saw the vulnerability in his face, the fear that mirrored her own. He wasn't a monster. He was a man fighting his own demons to keep her safe. We are a pair, aren't we? She said, a watery smile touching her lips. The broken woman and the dangerous man. Cole smiled. A crooked, beautiful thing. Maybe that is why we fit, he said. The breakthrough came with the snow. A late spring blizzard hit the basin. A final tantrum of winter. The wind howled around the cabin, piling drifts against the new door Cole had built. In the middle of the storm, one of the heifers they had bought, a scrawny thing that Cole had traded his saddle for, went into labor. They spent the night in the lean-to shed, fighting to save the calf. It was a breech birth, difficult and bloody. Cole's hands were deep inside the animal, guiding the life out, while Hannah held the lantern and soothed the heaving mother. When the calf finally slid out onto the straw, wet and steaming, blinking its dark eyes, they both collapsed back against the wall of the shed. It is alive, Hannah breathed. She wiped her forehead with the back of her sleeve, leaving a streak of blood and grime. Cole looked at her. Her hair was coming down. Her face was dirty, and she smelled of the barn, and she was radiant. He laughed. It was a sound of pure joy, something she had rarely heard from him. We did it, he said. They went back into the cabin, shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline. Cole built up the fire. He made coffee, sweetening it with the last of their molasses. They sat on the rug in front of the hearth, drinking the hot, sweet liquid. The success of the night, the triumph of life over the storm, had loosened something in Hannah's chest. The knot of fear that had lived there for years was gone. She looked at Cole. He was leaning back against the wood box, eyes closed, the firelight playing over the scar on his jaw. She set her cup down. She crawled across the rug. Cole opened his eyes. He watched her come. He did not move. He let her set the pace. Hannah reached out. She placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel it beating, strong, steady, alive. She traced the line of his jaw, her thumb brushing over the white scar tissue. "You are not him," she whispered. "No," Cole said raspily. "I am not." Hannah leaned in. She kissed him, this time. When his arms came around her, she did not flinch. She pressed closer. She felt the hardness of his body, the strength of him, and instead of fear, she felt power. She was choosing this. She was the one leading. She deepened the kiss, her hands tangling in his hair. She felt him groan, a vibration against her lips. "Take me to bed, Cole," she whispered. He lifted her. He carried her to the bunk they had built in the corner. The night was not a storm. It was a slow, rising tide. Cole moved with an agonizing slowness, checking her eyes every second, his hands trembling with the effort of his restraint. Every time she tensed, he stopped, waiting until she relaxed, until she nodded, until she pulled him back, and Hannah found that the surrender was not a defeat. It was a victory. To open herself, to trust, to let him see her scars and kiss them. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. When the moment finally came, when there were no more barriers between them, Hannah did not cry out in pain. She cried out in relief. She wrapped her legs around him and held on, safe in the center of the fire, knowing that this heat would not burn her. It would forge her. Summer came to the basin. The grass turned a deep, vibrant green. The creek ran clear. The garden Hannah had planted exploded with peas and potatoes. They moved around each other with a new ease. The tension was gone. They teased each other as they worked. Cole would come up behind her while she was washing clothes and wrap his arms around her waist, burying his face in her neck. And she would lean back into him, laughing. They were building a life. They were mending fences, raising cattle, and mending themselves. The cabin was no longer a hovel. It was a home. Hannah had sewn curtains from calico sacks. Cole had built a rocking chair for the porch. It was a sanctuary carved out of the wilderness, a place where the world could not touch them. Then the rider came. It was a boy from Bitter Creek, hired to run messages to the outlying homesteads. He rode up to the cabin one afternoon, handing a packet to Cole. Cole opened it on the porch. Hannah stood beside him, wiping flour from her hands. "It is from Mrs. Lang," Cole said, "and Dr. Ellison." He read the letter aloud. "Dear Hannah and Cole, I hope this finds you well and fed. The town is quieted down. The territorial governor sent a magistrate to review the McGraw case. With Dr. Ellison's testimony and the sheriff's report, the matter is settled. The county records now list Hannah Kincaid as the sole owner of the original homestead. Furthermore, the McGraw estate has been fined $2,000 for attempted fraud and malicious prosecution. Half of that fine has been held in trust for you at the bank, as restitution. You are vindicated. The town knows the truth. You can come back, if you wish. You would be welcome at my table any time. Sincerely, Mrs. Lang." Cole lowered the letter. He looked at Hannah. "You own the land. Hannah? And you have money? $1,000. That is a fortune." Hannah looked at the letter. She thought of the house in Bitter Creek. She thought of the town that had scorned her, and then the town that now wanted to welcome her back because she had money and the law on her side. She looked at the basin. She looked at the half-finished barn. She looked at the mountains that cradled them. "I do not want to go back," she said. Cole watched her carefully. "You could sell this place. You could move back to town. Be a lady of means." Hannah took the letter from his hand. She crumpled it. "I am a lady of means right here," she said. "I have a roof. I have a herd. And I have you." She tossed the paper into the wind. "Let the money stay in the bank. We will use it to buy winter feed. But this is home." Cole let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for months. He took her hand. "If we are staying," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "then we should do it right." He went down on one knee in the dirt. Hannah stared at him. Her heart skipped a beat. Cole took off his hat. He looked up at her, his gray eyes shining with a vulnerability that stripped him bare. "I am not a perfect man." Hannah, I have got a past that is ugly. I have got scars that won't fade. But I love you. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anything. He swallowed hard. I am not asking to marry you to make you respectable. I do not give a damn about what Bitter Creek thinks is respectable. I am asking because I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to stand between you and the wind. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, hammered out of a silver coin he had shaped himself. Will you marry me, Hannah? Hannah looked at the man kneeling in the dirt, the man who had lifted the wagon, the man who had slept on the floor, the man who had killed to save her and learned to be gentle to love her. She did not need protection anymore. She was strong. She could survive alone, but she didn't want to. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Cole. The wedding was 2 weeks later. They did not go to town. A traveling circuit preacher, riding through the valley on his way to the mining camps, agreed to stop. The witnesses were a couple of homesteaders from the next valley over, rough people who brought a jug of cider and a fiddle. They stood on the porch of the cabin. A light snow was dusting the hills, the first sign of the coming winter. The air was cold, biting at their cheeks, but the small ring of people felt warm. Hannah wore her best dress, with a sprig of sagebrush pinned to the bodice. Cole wore a clean shirt and a new vest she had sewn for him. The preacher spoke the words, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health. They looked at each other. They didn't see the preacher. They saw the firelight. They saw the storm. They saw the long road that had led them here. When it was time for the vows, Cole took Hannah's hands. His grip was firm, warm, and calloused. I promise you, he said, his voice cracking with the weight of his oath. I promise you, Hannah, I have got you safe now. Hannah squeezed his hands back. She looked deep into his eyes. And I have got you safe, she answered. That night, the snow began to fall in earnest. The guests had ridden away. The valley was silent, wrapped in white. Inside the cabin, the fire was roaring. The walls, thick and solid, held the heat. The new curtains were drawn against the dark. Cole and Hannah stood by the window, looking out at the falling snow. He stood behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on the top of her head. She leaned back into him, fitting perfectly against his chest. The world outside was still harsh. There would be blizzards. There would be wolves. There would be bad years and hard times. The prejudice of the world would always be there, waiting at the edge of their valley. But as Hannah watched the snow cover the tracks of their past, she knew they would endure. Their love had been born in a blizzard, under the crushing weight of a broken wagon. It had survived shame, violence, and fear. It was tempered steel. She turned in his arms. Cole looked down at her. The scar on his face softened in the firelight. He looked at peace. Happy? He asked softly. Hannah smiled. She reached up and kissed him. I am home, she said. And outside, the snow fell on the quiet basin, burying the world in white, while inside, the fire burned bright and steady, keeping the cold at bay. Closing message. Thank you for listening to this story of Hannah and Cole. It has been a journey through the storms of the heart and the harsh beauty of the American West. I hope their struggle for survival, justice, and love resonated with you. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. It is always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this tale, please consider subscribing to From Wild West for more stories of grit, romance, and the frontier spirit. Share your thoughts in English in the comments section. I read every one of them. Until next time, keep your fires burning.